Hello, everyone. How are we all doing?
Hi.
Good. Hello.
Hi. So this panel is called Get Your Facts Straight. And today we are joined by four gorgeous writers and journalists and incredible editors across the land. And we're going to be talking about fact checking and journalism in the world that we live in now and in the 20s. Gross, disgusting. Where are we? It's already October. What are we doing? Um, I'll start off. I'll introduce myself. My name is Mark. My pronouns are he and him. I am from Duneside, and I'm recording from Duneside, which is dark land. And I work at a broadcaster and as an editor at a community magazine. Angela, I'll get you to hit off next.
I'm Angela. I'm the digital producer over at Australian Geographic and the one of the editors of Sweaty City, which is a new climate change magazine. And I'm recording from Gadigal land.
Ellen?
Hi, I'm Ellen. My pronouns are she and her. I'm an audio producer with Guardian Australia, and I'm coming to you today from the Eora Nation.
And Jacinta?
Hi, I'm Jacinta Bola. I work as a fact checker and writer at Science Alert. I also dip my toe into lots of different freelance projects. My pronouns are she and they. I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation.
Woo! I thought I'd start off with a really basic question. And so the very first one we're going to discuss as a group is, what is a fact? What is it? Like, what is the best way to describe what a fact is? Angela,
Starting off with a really easy question. I guess, okay, this actually is such a hard question. I think it's just something that is irrefutable, that is just straight up right there. Yeah, for me, it's just something that's like totally irrefutable. And which is obviously difficult to, I guess, understand or difficult to interpret in our modern world with things like deepfakes and stuff like that. But yeah, to me, it just remains something that is irrefutable. That's what it is.
Ellen?
Yeah, I would say something it's known or it can be proven to be true. I wouldn't go as far as saying irrefutable, because I think what we think of as true often changes sometimes with science, for example, and our understanding of things evolves. So I'd say it's what we know to be true now, but could be proven to be true. Yeah.
Interesting take. Love. Jacinta?
Me going last. I don't know what else to say. No, I think exactly. I don't know how, like, when I come, like, fact is definitely something that I think that is true, is something that is not like wishy-washy or like might be true in certain concepts, in certain like situations. But that being said, though, I'm not sure if that's all. Like, I don't think a fact checker just checks facts, which is, like a bit of a interesting take. But I think that although that's the most important part of it, I think there's also, because it is such, like, there's only so many like straight facts, there's a lot of stuff that is wishy-washy that you sometimes need to check or get right or err on the side of caution.
I'm going to sort of agree with Angela here. I just feel like a fact is something that's just so undeniable, like it's an undeniable truth. But I will acknowledge, Ellen, that is true. Things will change. Things will change as time evolves and as the context evolves. So I'm really interested to hear how individually you guys fact check and what your process looks like. Because I know that it varies from, depending on what you do, like, are you, as a journalist and as a writer, or primarily as a researcher, it differs for everyone. So I do want to hear, Jacinta, I'll start off with you. How do you fact check in your work?
Yeah, so Science Lab has really specific guides on what we do and how we go through each of the processes. Some of the important things that we might be focusing on would be names of people, names of institutions, numbers, making sure that millions and billions are correct, which gets wrong way more than you'd want to admit. Also, any kind of transcripts that people have used, whether it's like interviews or that kind of thing, making sure that what they're saying is not being taken out of context, and just generally making sure that what we've said is as correct as we can make it, whether that's like a word's been put that's missing or needs to be added or anything like that, to kind of make it as accurate as possible. Yeah.
Cool.
What about you, Ellen?
In the podcast team, I'm going to kind of speak for that, but we rely on the journalists a lot to make sure that what they're telling us is true. But obviously, there's 4 of us on the team who are preparing, editing, and listening to what they're saying. So all of us are generally pretty attuned to looking out for things that might be wrong. We have editorial staff that listen, who are slightly higher up than us producer plebs, to listen and fact check as well. I know in my own work and the stories that I do, I generally tend to fact check as I go along. So you'll see my research and structure documents with hyperlinks everywhere off to other websites so that other people coming in know where I've got the information and can verify what I'm saying as well. So that is probably our process. And I actually would be very interested I haven't spoken to any of our journalists about their process, but I'd be very interested to hear what they are doing to fact check too.
Angela?
I feel like my, I guess, primary form of fact checking would be consulting experts on a regular occasion. Like if I'm doing an article, say on something like just even recently about, the impact of climate change on Komodo dragons, like I'm talking to like 2 experts about that topic, and I'll go back and forth, and then I'll try and find an independent expert that isn't involved in the study. Because I guess I found over my 3 years at Australian Geographic, sometimes, you'll get a press release in your inbox that's basically like new research, groundbreaking, amazingness, and then you'll interview the person involved in the study, and then you'll interview someone independent being like, oh yeah, like it's cool and great, but it's not, it's not the first of its kind, and you get that kind of perspective. So for me, like running most of my writing by experts is a really big deal for me. I guess that sometimes I find that people find that a little controversial sometimes. Like, for example, like they don't like sending their work to other people once it's finished. And I guess, in that process, when I am sending my work back to experts, sometimes they'll say, I don't really like, this phrasing, it's correct, but it could say this. Think like you're always going to get people that say stuff like that, or, oh, I agree with this, but maybe if you, or they'll just send you back a bunch of grammar notes. You're like, okay, we have like a copy editor for that. But yeah, so I guess, I mean, I'd be curious to see just into what's your opinion on sending work back to an expert, and do you like people or experts looking over your work, or after you've done that initial interview, are you sort of like, I've done the interview, I've got the quotes, that's that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. So at Science Alert, we are not allowed to have it checked by another scientist for journalistic integrity reasons. Journalistic integrity. I'm not 100% on board with that as much in some of my freelancing. I feel like I love to send the quotes, especially that I've taken from researchers, back to them, just so they can confirm they're happy with them. I'd much prefer that they be happy with the quotes rather than me print something and then they go, I didn't say it like that, you've done it wrong. But I'm not sure. I don't know. I think that I will spruik a group that I'm part of called Science Journalists Australia, Association of Australia, and they are great. We actually had this conversation recently, and some of them are 100% on the side of don't send your research, don't send your article to scientists because they're not on the same team as science journalists. They're a group and we're reporting on them, but we're not in the same, like, we're not science communicators. We don't necessarily have to be perfect. Like, we don't have to tell them, no, perfect's the wrong word, but we don't have to be exactly on the same side as them. But I feel like sometimes mistakes do get through, and I don't want a scientist being upset about something that you've written. I don't know. I think there's 2 sides to it, and I don't know which one I'm on.
It could almost, it's for me, it's kind of a safety thing. Like, particularly what you mentioned, the main thing I go back to people about is quotes, because the tiniest little word that you've misheard and you write in a particular fashion, could end up ruining the entire basis of an article. So I think like that's the biggest thing for me.
Yeah. Sounds like the slight advantage of podcasts is that you can't like no one can go back and be like, I didn't say that, because you've got it recorded.
Yeah.
It's on the record. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess the thing we have to be worried about is, so we can get pretty nifty with our editing, but you don't want to be cutting two completely different things to what they said together. So we are very conscious of making sure that when we're editing people that we are representing what they said correctly.
For me, fact checking, I really just use it when I need to validate a point that I've already made. And, I look for a source, or whether it be like a reputable website. I think a really good example is for the Western, which is the community paper that I work for. We put together a COVID guide, and it was really hard navigating through all these sources, like what was reputable, what isn't, and what was truth and what wasn't. And so I think that's a good way to pivot into our next sort of question, like how has fact checking changed in the recent past? And Ellen, you touched on it, as a podcaster, you have a bit more freedom in what's being said, or editing, or fact checking in that sense. Could you delve a bit more into that, and how, going from radio, going to podcast, going to something that's easily moldable, like how has that changed fact checking?
You mean, and when you say recent past, do you mean like in the advent of technology, or in the COVID recent past?
Maybe the Trump era.
Yes. Okay, Angela, I'd love that. Let's go last 4 years, presidential gap.
And last 4 years actually probably would have seen my transition from like radio to podcasting. So that's pretty interesting. I think radio, I don't think they're necessarily dissimilar in terms of the fact-checking process you go through. Like on radio, you do want to be you're still saying factual things, and then correcting it later if indeed you do get something wrong. With podcasting, we have put out things that are wrong before, and then we have to go. Luckily, in podcasting, you can go and re-upload a new file that has the right thing. But I think the process is still there. You want to get all the information right beforehand, usually the first time. And yeah, does that answer the question?
Can I ask you, Ellen, when you do an upload, like when you re-upload a thing that's, because I mean, this happens, the same thing happens in journalism. Do you do like a note the next time you do a podcast? Do you update and they're like, we messed up, like we fixed it in the recording?
This has been an interesting conversation where we keep having, because we keep wanting to put out a Twitter comment saying, sometimes we got this wrong, it has been updated. But so far we've just, I don't think I think definitely we could be more transparent in what we're changing, because online you have the ability to write at the bottom, like this article was changed at this time to reflect this thing. We haven't done that yet. And it's something we need. It's a stealth edit. It's, like I said, possibly something we need to revisit.
I think when we're discussing the last 4 years, I think it's really important to talk about social media and, how that has changed the fact-checking world, what's real and what isn't. And Angela, I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, because you did mention the concept of deep fake. So if you don't mind just quickly explaining what that is and how it's made ripples in social media, and how that has completely usurped our whole world as is in terms of what's real.
Wow,
what
okay,
isn't.
that's low-key question. Okay. So I guess like the New York Times has done some amazing like investigative work around deep fakes, and I guess like I read a lot of like the crazy stuff that they've been reporting on. It's basically like where you see a video of someone and it on say Joe Biden, for example, and it literally looks like Joe Biden talking, but it just isn't. And I guess with Trump, but obviously there's arguments that this happened even before Trump, but I feel like social media is just a conspiracy theory kind of like cesspool, and I feel general opinion, and I just think that it goes back to a lot of what people say about climate change communication and how effective it can be if you're getting it from people that you love, and how you're most responsive to information that you get from people that you know and that you're familiar with. And I feel like that's the issue with social media. is that like it's a lot of people sharing stuff that maybe like it literally isn't fact checked, has been made by old mate in his basement at like 2 a.m. who's like, you know, that kind of stuff. So with like weird graphics and like Comic Sans. So I just think social media has added an element that an element of I guess need for fact checking. And I guess we've seen, like, for example, Quanda back in the day obviously didn't have like live fact checking, but now it does. And I guess
Really?
I think on Twitter,
Yeah, right.
and it's like, let us know if you've heard something that, you know, and it's like, oh, okay, great, like that's a really good development. And then you have like other little, but then part of me, the skeptical side of me, just thinks, and because I am in the climate change space, I often just think, if people, so you've got all these facts about climate change, and that's what they are what they are. 99% of scientists say this is what's happening, but you still have people that say, well, no, what about this, you know? And so I just, yes, I guess I love how fact checking has become so prevalent, and it's something that you can rely on. And like for me, like I love ABC Fact Check, and I think they work with RMIT or a Melbourne University, something like that. And I trust those articles, but that's just me. And I guess everyone has different positions on that. So I think it's social media sort of transformed our need for fact checking, and now fact checking is way more live and way more available. But at the same time, I'm skeptical about whether or not facts work, if that makes sense.
You know,
especially being in the climate change environment, I'm just like, when will it end?
I was actually gonna talking before about like the new, like this is what we're in now. COVID has thrown an entire spanner in the works with that too, because COVID is a crisis, and a crisis situation doesn't necessarily have like the facts at the start, right? When a virus comes out, you know some small bits about it, but you don't know everything. And so the gaps get filled in by information that's just not true. And then you kind of have to come back and try and, you know, explain that that's not the case and here's what's happening. And I feel like it's really interesting because some of the writing that I did early in the pandemic, I look back at it now and I'm like, I was too strong. I should not have been that strong about something, because, you know, with COVID and with that kind of stuff, it's always changing, it's always updating. And I think, I don't know, I stressed out about like stuff that I wrote, and I'm still like, we get fact checks, we make sure it's good, but even if it's been fact checked at the time, 2 months later, it can be literally the opposite, which is what happens in a crisis, but none of us are really, you know, COVID doesn't, I don't know, we haven't been dealing with it very well. Well, we've done okay. Victoria's getting there.
I'm really happy that you brought it up, because I did want to, you know, bring this up with everyone else. Hoaxes and conspiracy theories have run amok amidst COVID. It is insane. And Jacinta, I want you to chat from, you know, a science background and from a writing background as well. You know, what sources can we undeniably trust? You know, like, can we trust celebrity chef Pete Evans with our health? Like,
yes.
And Ellen,
Yes.
Before we jump into that, Ellen, I think The Guardian, fact check me if I'm wrong, The Guardian ran a poll and it said 1 in 8 Australians believed 5G or coronavirus was caused by 5G.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess that was an essential poll. And
yes, essential poll, that's the one.
Yeah.
Insane.
It is insane.
So, Jacinta, I'd love to hear from a science background, particularly a very credible background, may I say, in amidst everything. How did that go?
Yeah, see, I don't know. Like with COVID, the misinformation is crazy, and you know the 5G stuff is like nuts. As soon as a new conspiracy comes out, I'm constantly gobsmacked. I'm like, I didn't see this coming. Like, you know, you assume, you're like, okay, I'm gonna say there's gonna be some weird conspiracy, and then just this whole other one comes left of field. So I'm not sure that I don't really know if I have I wouldn't listen to Pete Evans if I was going to listen to and the other thing with COVID, again, because it's a crisis, because things are constantly changing, because science gets pushed forward, to an extent that we don't usually see, you end up with these really weird studies, and sometimes studies that you might think are completely fine, and they get published in the Lancet, for example. Next week, they find out that they're not correct and they need to be retracted. And so I think that maybe you need, like, in the same way that you would a normal science story, you kind of have your peer-reviewed content at the top, and then you have, like, maybe your content that's coming from a preprint, but then you want to be careful with that. You want to probably check that with somebody else who's in the field, and then you might have press releases from reputable places, like a couple of the people that are doing like big drug trials, that kind of thing, and then you've got kind of your uncle and Pete Evans and all those kind of people down there. But you just need to be more careful, because even your top tier peer-reviewed article can still be wrong, because it's just, they're getting out really fast. The scientists are in just as much stress as the rest of us, and we end up, I guess there's mistakes, or there's things that are a bit dodgy and cutting corners. But then I don't want people to turn away from science. You know what I mean? I don't want people to go, well, science is obviously crap, because it's not. It's just, I don't know. We all have these little problems, and it's the best we've got.
And it's not just science, it's published institutions as well. So we had a lot of discussions early on in the pandemic, because there were things happening that we wanted to question, but at the same time, if we went too hard on the government, that undermines the trust in the government. So you really have to weigh up what you're doing, what your strategy is, and what things you should be drawing attention to, and what things you need to just trust that the government is doing things right.
It's so hard. I don't know. Like, I wish we knew what it was. Like, science, journalism. Who invented this?
I think that's a really good way to pivot into our next question. How do we see fact-checking working in the future? And besides the challenges that you've mentioned, what are some other sort of barriers to proper fact-checking? Angela, I want to hear your thoughts on this, especially as someone who works in a field that's very time sensitive, how will that change in the future?
Yeah, for me, I'm hoping, and I have my fingers crossed, that social media giants do something about this stuff. I think, like, obviously we saw Twitter trying to do that. I don't know what everyone's opinion of that was. I think Trump had tweeted and they kind of fact checked, but even then that made me think, like, I think they linked to a particular news article, like a news publication. I was like, I wonder how they chose which publication they were going to like use to fact check like Trump. Like, that even in my head I was like, I wonder what that thinking process was. But anyway, with Facebook, it's like they're way further, like they have way further to go, because you've got someone who, like Mark Zuckerberg, who's literally saying there's like no problem. Like, what do you guys mean? And it's like, okay, this isn't going to work. So my hope is that there's something done about social media giants and their responsibility in this process, because in my mind, publishers, which have been like, their staff has been absolutely dwindled, are going to the effort of live fact checking all these different things, and have implemented all these different elements of fact checking. And I just think, like, at what point, like what more can publishers really do on that side of things? I feel like a lot of it comes down to social media and what we see our friends and family sharing, and there needs to be some sort of responsibility there. But I don't know what you guys' thoughts are on that.
So are you saying that, like, it's our responsibility to be commenting on every uncle's post saying that he's wrong? Or do you mean, like...
I want Mark Zuckerberg to, like, take down posts that say Bill Gates is trying to kill us all. And, like, like, that's what I don't want individuals like us saying, oh, well, old mate's written blah, 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 or I'm going to go and say he's wrong, because it's not worth our energy, obviously, to do that regularly. I want social media giants to, like, have some sort of process in which they're going, okay, like this is clearly false advertising. This is clearly clearly freaking, say Angelina Jolie is not advertising this product that's going to solve COVID-19. Like, so just things like that. I think just get it off your platform. Like, I understand that there will be nuances with regard to that. Like, I know that there are things where it's like a little bit harder to tell whether something's like obviously factually correct or not, but I think with things like that, it's like obviously there's a lot of stuff on that you can just easily be like, yep, get rid of that.
Yeah, if you've got moderators getting rid of nudity and offensive language, how hard is it to add false information onto that list?
Yeah,
but I don't know. I don't think Facebook would want to do that, right? Because if they did,
absolutely, they won't do it. It's against their business model. They won't do it.
Exactly. Yeah, which is sad, I guess.
But if they can remove all the news sites in Australia,
True.
I think if we're talking about social media, I think it's also really important to note algorithms and echo chambers and just how there's bias there. And then I don't know if you guys have been Twitter lately, but there's this new trend where people are posting photos where it's a person with light skin and it's a person with dark skin, and then it chooses to highlight the person with light skin. Have you guys seen that on Twitter at all? Or
yeah,
no.
It's so. Oh yeah, you explain it then.
Oh no, it's just insane. It's just literally people are posting up like long panoramic photos, and you only get to see a preview when you're scrolling through your feed, and it chooses to highlight or it chooses to crop in the lighter skinned person or the lighter figure, which is insane.
It's like
I don't know
whether algorithm.
Yes, literally, and I think obviously more fact checking needs to go into that. It is a new meme. It is a new trend. But since like you mentioned you've seen it, I want to hear your thoughts on it. Like, is that a product of consumers, or is it a product of the moderators and social media organizations?
Yeah, I read quite a bit about this because I find it really interesting, and it's happened. Like, it doesn't. Like, this isn't the first time this kind of thing happened. Like, there's been a bunch of stuff about like AIs reading CVs, and then like there was one really bad example where like if they saw the like women's football team, for example, or like anything to do with women in the resume, it was for a coding job, they just got rid of them because like the algorithm had decided that men were better at coding. And it's not like, and the same thing happens with with people of color, like any kind of minority group just end up not, and they say, oh, it was an unintended consequence, we fixed it. But I think that if you, like, with all of these algorithms, with all of this kind of AI stuff, if you program it with a bunch of white dudes, which is what usually happens, you end up with stuff that just favors white dudes. And I know these things are getting better, and I know that like there's some stuff that they've realized that's bad for PR, so we're going to fix that. But the fact that we can still do this, for example, the Twitter meme, is insane. And I have seen one person did do a couple of different examples, and he's the only one that I've seen that the black person showed up. But like, ooh. I don't know. Like, I wish that was more of a. I don't know. I don't know what this like. It just need to be fixed. Shouldn't be that hard, right?
But I think that brings on an interesting point, and to bring it back to fact checking, that a lot of quote unquote objective truth is white man truth. So because they're the dominant, power structure, a lot of things that we think are true, you kind of dig a bit cheaper and you're like, oh, that's only true because of you're a man and that's your bias. So, I was having this argument with my housemate the other day where he was like, oh, it's like a fundamental truth that men are more likely to die from heart attacks. And I was like, no, they're not. Women are actually more likely to die from heart attacks. Like, there's just been this narrative.
Pain and Prejudice by Gabrielle
Jackson, yeah, or Invisible Women by, I'm going to butcher her name, but Caroline. I'm not going to even bother to say the last name because I'm going to butcher it. But
I forgot
Invisible
Gabrielle's last name, but there's so many books on that right
Gabrielle
now.
Jackson.
Like, yeah. So there's so many books on that stuff right now. I'm shocked that someone would say that.
Yeah, no, well, I was schooling him. I had to get the articles up, and then he believed me afterwards. But yeah, especially in, I think medical research is a big area where for so long male men and white men have been the dominant for so long, and we assume that as the baseline, when in actual fact things are different for women and people of color.
I think this is
Yeah.
would be a good
What
time.
is a fact? Are we back to
Yeah.
beginning?
I think this is a really good pivot. I'm glad that you mentioned, minorities, women, people of color, Black people, Indigenous Australians. Human rights fact-checking and sort of journalistic impartiality. How does that operate now in the realms of things like Black Lives Matter and, the abuse that Asian people faced during COVID-19 and during the early stages? Like, how does one fact check when, they potentially don't have the lived experience, or they potentially, don't really understand the concept in full? How does that work?
I'm gonna call out here. There's no ABC people on the panel, so I'm allowed to. There's one particular image that ABC keep using of these two Asian people in Melbourne walking around with masks on, and I don't understand why they keep using it. Like, everyone is walking around in Melbourne with masks on right now, and I'm like, guys, like, stop it. Just, you don't need to do it. You can pick anyone else in Melbourne. You don't need to wear it. And I don't know. It really does. It stresses, like, I just don't understand why these kind of things, the COVID stuff, again, is insane that we've had this, and people have just dealt with so many issues. And even before all of the lockdowns and everything like that, like Asian restaurants closing because people just weren't going to them, and people being like, I don't know, like, it makes me so upset that is it a problem that the fact that most newsrooms are just white and we don't have enough people of color, like, that these, like, opinions, or that we're not, I feel like it's important to be able to explain to people, like, no, this isn't okay. Like, there's journalism, and there's, like, we're going to be speaking about this objective thing, but I don't think that you can be objective in a situation like that. And the way that we talk about objectivity, it's kind of silly, because what we cover is going to be objective, because we are going to be picking the thing that we want to talk about, or the thing we want to write, or the thing that we think that the audience is going to listen to. And so that in itself means that we've pushed bias into it. And yeah, I don't know. Just want a big rant there. Someone else jump in.
I love it. Welcome. I love it. Angela, I wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yes. So I guess, like, the first example when we talk about BLM that kind of, like, springs to mind is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but the Ages article that basically falsely claimed that protesters were BLM protesters in Melbourne were going to, like, spit on officials and things like that. I guess, like, I've long been curious about what the process was behind, like how did you not consult organizers on if you were going to accuse them of such a thing, and did someone just say that to you and you accepted it as, like, oh, okay, like, why would they lie about that, or why would they misspeak about something so serious? And so I've always wondered about I guess like what happened there and what that process was. And I think that's been repeated as well. That's the other thing that happened with those little like those non-facts, like, then that was just repeated by like 8 other publications that assumed it was like accurate. And so I saw like, there was like lots of backlash to BLM in Melbourne when like all the backlash was based on this one false quote or false understanding of something that someone had said. And I just think like, I wonder, well, I'd be curious about what the process was behind that. But then also during Black Lives Matter, I guess you could see like a little bit of botched reporting in that regard. And I think that was a prime example of it. And I think it does speak to the need for people of color in newsrooms, like, way more.
Yeah, absolutely. I
think when we're having discussions about this, I think it's important to acknowledge like lived experience versus fact. You know, how are they the same thing? Are they in an intimate relationship? You know, what matters more in certain cases? And I do want to hear your thoughts, Ellen, as someone who works in podcasts, one of the most intimate forms of communicating. You know, there's people huddled over a cute little microphone being like, hey, this is my thought. So Ellen, I'd love to hear, you know, what ways more do you feel like they counter each other out? What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I can actually give you an interesting example that we had to deal with a few weeks ago. We were working on a story about domestic violence, and this woman had a claim that something had happened between her and her partner, but we were asked the question, you know, was this something that was tested in the court system? So in that way, we were kind of hamstrung, like we couldn't use her personal story because it hadn't been tested in the court system, which I thought was, you know, that's quite interesting thing to happen. Whether it's right or not, I don't know. But I think the way that we produce our podcast, we have a combination of the personal story and the reporter as well talking around it. So in that way, you get the best of both worlds. So you get that personal story, you get that intimate nature and that lived experience. And at the same time, the reporter's there who's done all the research, has spoken to experts and other people to be able to talk around that and say, give that legitimacy and say, this is what's happening, not just to one person, but to many people, for example.
I think it could also just be down to the fact that a lot of Australian publications will choose either one depending on which is more newsworthy. And I wanted to chat to you about this, Angela, someone who you say you commission more than you write. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so.
What do you lean towards when you're commissioning a piece? Is it something about the lived experience within the piece, or is it the facts? You know, what draws you in?
Yeah, actually, I actually do have, I mean, not that this would be my straight answer because I don't know if I have a preference or not, but just as an example, Sweaty City were looking to commission a story on how post bushfires, how climate change would disproportionately impact people with a disability, and basically talking about you know how you kind of saw the rise of Auslan with like it was just more I guess signage was more prevalent on TV post the bushfires and then with COVID-19, and we were like, well, this is really interesting because why wasn't this a thing like forever? And so we wanted to talk about, you know, things like even just like evacuation plans and whether or not people have actually given a thought to how disabled people may be evacuated in extreme climate change scenarios in the future. And my first inkling and my first thought when we were talking about commissioning that was to go to someone with a disability, without a doubt. So rather than, and that was just my initial thought process, is like, we'll go to someone who actually, has a disability to talk about some of those issues and interview people who have different perspectives. That was that's kind of like a current situation, but I don't know whether or not that's, you know, maybe if an investigative journalist did something, or because I feel, I don't know, like, you know, if you find something out and then you follow a trail, like, I think that's one thing. But then obviously in my mind at that particular time with that particular story, I thought, you know, obviously it would be appropriate to get a disabled person to write the story.
I'm gonna jump in with a completely different story. I read an article a couple of weeks ago. I think it was from the feed, but I'm not 100% sure, about migrants in particular that were going to these like anti-COVID rallies. And I thought it was a really interesting piece because it was looking at like these like really low socioeconomic groups that were like really marginalized and just like people, like they felt like they weren't being listened to and they feel like their jobs are on the line and all this kind of stuff. And so they were but as well as that, they also had all of these really these very wrong views about what COVID was, whether that was, you know, that 5G was causing it, or that, you know, it's not really that bad and it's not worse than a cold. And the author did a really good job of both listening to those stories and making you empathetic to the fact that these stories were important to these people, but also kind of fact checking in the story that saying like, this is not correct. Like, but you didn't walk away thinking that these people were like, that they should be mocked or anything like that. It was very much like, this is a sad situation. here's what's happening. You should be listening to these people, even if you don't agree that, like, even if you, like, no one should agree that COVID is caused, like, is worse, is less bad than the flu. But, you know, like, it was a really interesting piece. And I don't think I've seen a lot of content like that where it is lived experience, even if the, like, thoughts that are going on behind the process might not be factually accurate.
So it could essentially just be a matter of striking the perfect balance between both, or
Definitely.
drawing elements from both. And I'm really happy you mentioned, journalism in general. Like, journalists aren't seen as super trustworthy, by the public. Do you think fact checking is a helpful process for the audience? Ellen, I want to hear your thoughts, because I think this was a question that you suggested.
Maybe I should counter that by saying that I think actually, like, ABC journalists are quite trusted. Like, a lot of research keeps coming out saying that the Australian public does trust the ABC. So I think there's something to be said for a public broadcaster that is doing its job is extremely important. As for journalism in general, like, I want to say I can be trusted. I think there's definitely some news sources that are, I would say, more trustworthy than others. And there are also news sources that are much more upfront with their bias. So The Guardian, we say we're a progressive news source. So you are going to get a certain caliber of stories because we are progressive and we care about issues that a lot of other news organizations don't want to follow up or keep the pressure on the government or whatever. And I think the fact-checking process is pretty important to that. And whether it's the ABC, whether it's The Guardian, whether it's like The Conversation, these are all excellent sources where you see claims broken down in, like, very digestible articles with questions and answers, explainer pieces. And I think they're very useful in kind of seeing, getting under the hood of a story and a fact or a claim, and being able to understand it and take it in yourself.
I'm glad you brought that up, that just the idea of publications that are quite overt about their political leaning, whether it be progressive, conservative, traditional. Angela, I wanted, and Jacinta as well, you both come from very objective, scientific climate change backgrounds. Like, is there a leaning there? And does that affect the way that you fact check? Jacinta, I'll get you to start first.
So this is really interesting because science is such a weird domain. Some science, right-wing people love. Like, give them a physics story about, like, or nuclear energy or anything like that. They are obsessed. They want to know all about it. They flood the comment section. But we will also write a article about climate change or about COVID and about, like, maybe Donald Trump's handling of the crisis. And it's not, we try quite hard to be as unbiased as possible when it comes to that kind of stuff, possibly to our detriment. I don't necessarily think that we should be quite as, neutral as we are, but they'll still come for us. And so they'll be like, I'm not gonna follow your site anymore because you're just a left-wing propaganda machine. But you're like, it's still science, guys. Like, you're still talking about the same thing. It's just something that you don't enjoy, And so it just really, it's a struggle. And I don't know. We have rather a right-wing audience, which is surprising considering what we cover. But I like to think that maybe some of them are learning something. If they appreciate our other content, maybe a few of them it gets through on the climate change content. I don't know if that's happening.
Just off that, Jacinta, recently I think the Scientific American for the first time ever took a position on the election, and were basically like, look, obviously you have to vote for Joe Biden. Like, he is Trump is so anti-science. Like, he forced us to take a position, like, in our 200-year history. And then I read the Twitter comments and they were all like, wow, I'm canceling my subscription, and I bet if you went to look at the subscription list, they're not even on the subscription list. They're probably just saying that. So that's what I've found to be true as well. But yeah, similarly, just into Australian Geographic, very much like, we are like half conservative, half progressive. And so my hope is a lot like yours, in that I hope that, with our climate change piece as well, so maybe we get like a positive and a negative reaction. I'm hoping that people are just learning something, and I don't want people to disengage. So I think, that doesn't, just because we have like maybe conservative, a conservative readership as well, I don't think that means we steer away from any topics. I think people just accept us in what we're going to write, and they either like parts or they don't. Like, some people come for the wildlife, other people come for the climate change coverage, other people come for the adventure side of AG, which I know nothing about because I'm lazy. So like there's all different sides to our audience. So, but yeah, very similar to Science Alert.
Actually,
I really
Mark,
hope so.
I was going to say, Mark, I wonder, as working for a public broadcaster who also has to be neutral, whether you, picking up what Jacinta said, do you think that is to the detriment sometimes?
It's a little weird. I see a lot of comments on articles, and I think SBS really does project a really progressive, left-leaning image. And so I found the ratio identical across all reactions. I think I published an article talking about, being queer and being Mormon, or being queer and religious. And it's about 90% of the comments were supportive, and then 10% weren't. And then I found that ratio carries through any content that published on any SBS platform. That's probably what I'm seeing. I don't know if it's what's been filtered for me. So I'm concerned that I'm viewing things from in echo chamber, or maybe the algorithm is only showing me positive comments, because I know that things can be easily filtered out depending on the publication, depending on the outlet. So I think I personally just need to do a bit more in digging, maybe a bit more borrowing and searching, just so that I can see what are some genuine reactions. How do people actually respond to this? How can that shape my work in the future? Or should it not be about their reactions, and should it just be about my truth and the facts that I present?
Yeah, I disagree. Yeah. As somebody who like reads the comments on a daily basis, just don't read the comments. Don't do it. There's nothing good in there. Like, even if it's 90% positive, take the positive, ignore the negative. They're not worth it.
100%. I think a good final question to wrap everything up is, what do you wish you knew about fact checking before you began your media career or your writing career? Ellen, I want to start with you. What are some things that you wish you knew?
Oh, that it's so time consuming. Like, be prepared for how time consuming it is. I think, what do I wish I knew? Yeah, I think the importance of it, I am only now starting to really grapple with, and I wish probably that I paid attention to it a lot sooner, because I think if you go back to a lot of my only work, it was a bit of a don't let the facts get in the way of a story. No. Like, I think I wouldn't say that I was making things up, but I don't think I was as stringent as I am now. And it's taken me a long time to get there and to learn those skills. So I think the earlier you can start doing it, the easier it becomes.
Angela?
I think, like, I was involved in student magazines, so like I feel like I've made all my big mistakes, in the sense of, like, it was really good ground to sort of like test journalism and see like what was important. And I made some mistakes there that I've kind of gone, oh, okay, wow, okay, we're not doing that again. And so, but like, just going off what you said, Ellen, like, one of the biggest things that I learned from working in student magazines and that I've now taken on to AG is very much like, just fact check everyone. Like, even if someone says something, like, just check, like, even just check everyone. It doesn't matter who they are, just check everyone, just get another perspective. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, I need to, I need to fact check this person. It can just be like, oh, just try and find a different perspective and try and see, what other thoughts are on a particular thing, and just make sure, don't take people's word for things, and go and do your own research.
Yeah.
And just, sorry, jumping in on that, another good tip that someone gave me recently was check the facts you agree with most the most, more stringently than others, because that's where your confirmation
Absolutely.
bias is coming in.
I have looked up
Love
the age
that.
of the universe about 50 million times because I got it wrong once and I have not again. Always check. No, my idea might be that like I think of fact checking like being a goalie. If you do the job really well, nobody notices, and you just stop all of the like opponents' wrong facts coming in. But if you do your job wrong, people notice, and you get comments about it, and you get emails about it, and it just people hate you. And so like, oh, they don't even hate you. They hate the journalist, and it's not really their fault. It's my fault. And so I feel like the thing that I would have told young baby Jacinta is that you will sometimes get it wrong, and it sucks. Just don't make the same mistake again.
For me, like as a primarily op-ed writer, I started out purely writing from my own perspectives. And so my relationship with fact-checking grew as me as a critical thinker grew. It was sort of parallel that growth. And I think it's just looking back like, oh my God, like that's how you think, but that's not how everyone else thinks. Or, there's a million different worlds outside of your own that you need to consider. Sure, you could, speak on behalf of one, but you can't speak on behalf of all of them. So I think I wish I knew a bit more about, I don't know what the term is, just to be less of a journalistic narcissist, and to be more of a all over loving, spread positivity where you can person. And yeah, I think I wish I knew that. But we're getting there. We're learning. Growing is a process. And yeah, I think that's all the questions. Does anyone else want to mention anything specifically while we're here?
No, I just really love Jacinta's goalie metaphor.
Yeah, I know. I'm like,
Yeah,
it's the best.
yeah.
That's what young writers are all about, right? Just learning to make mistakes.
Awesome. I think that's our time. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank
Woo,
you.
thanks.
Thanks, guys.